At this time, I'd like to introduce our next speaker who's going to launch our next topic, and that is Yingling Fan, who is Professor of Urban and Regional Planning at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. So Yingling's research focuses on urban land use, transportation planning, and the impacts of urban planning on human health and social equity. Her recent work focuses on public transportation development, emotional well-being in cities, and community-engaged transportation equity research. She has published over 100 refereed articles, book chapters, and research reports in high-impact outlets across multiple disciplines, including transportation, urban planning, and public health. She has directed and co-directed over 40 research projects, and her award-winning work has appeared in leading media outlets, including Time Magazine, National Geographic, and The Atlantic. In her spare time, just kidding, Yingling is the PhD program director at the Humphrey School. She holds several editorial leadership positions and is a successful entrepreneur and inventor. And Yingling received her PhD in City and Regional Planning from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And it's my pleasure to turn things over to Yingling.
Well, thank you, Gina, for your warm introduction. I have to clarify that I'm on sabbatical this spring, so I'm not the PhD program director this year. But yeah, I very much enjoy the experience. So I wanted to thank Kyle and everybody at CTS for putting this together, and it's always wonderful to see old friends and be able to make new connections through those type of events. And my presentation today, on the program is titled United by Transportation. It is the title of the Future of Mobility piece that I contributed to that series that Kyle led. And I was inspired by, when I was writing United by Transportation, that piece, I was inspired by the 2022 Summer Olympics game in Tokyo. They had a motto called United by Emotions. As you know, that I study human emotions in transportation. So when I saw that title, I could not help but wonder that transportation as a shared space, can it function like sports that create shared passion and emotion, and therefore help us to unite our communities, So that was kind of like how I was inspired to write that United by Transportation piece. But after that, I kind of started to think deeper about, kind of the role of transportation in people's lives. So in today's presentation, it's kind of derivative work after I wrote that piece, and I wanted to introduce you some of my newest ideas about the ways to humanize transportation and think about the roles of transportation in people's lives. So with that, let me move to the first slide. So I wanted to introduce you 4 levels of conceptualization, or we can call it reconceptualizations, because some of the conceptualizations that I introduce here is actually not that conventional. So the first level, it is actually the conventional wisdom that we it has been widely accepted by the public and by transportation researchers and practitioners. There is a consensus that transportation can connect among people and places, right? And also that, now we know that there is advancements in virtual mobility and accessibility. But as some of the discussants mentioned in the conversation circle, like before the break, that physical movements of goods and people are still very important and are very essential for the development of our society. So I would say that here that transportation as a connection, this conceptualization is kind of the conventional wisdom, right? And the transportation actually has always been intended for connecting people and the places. So the second level has been acknowledged in the field, but relatively less accepted compared to the first conceptualization. So in this level, transportation is conceptualized as shared space that itself is essential to placemaking and community building. Actually, this is very much in line with kind of the work I mentioned about united by transportation, but that transportation itself is the shared space that bring people together and have the potential to create shared passions and emotions. But we cannot stop right there, right? So I offer this third level that is not widely accepted in the field either. But also to some degree, I think some pioneers already recognized this. So at this level, transportation is conceptualized as essential to every aspect of human lives. And it is essential that we understand transportation as people's lived experience. Okay. And then later I will have slides that talk, in detail about those conceptualizations. Now, I wanted to introduce you the fourth level, and which I feel like it's kind of like the ultimate level of conceptualization, and it is more abstract and also is the least acknowledged in the field. At this level, transportation is conceptualized as a social construct that is subject to human definitions and interpretations. And as it is subject to human definitions and interpretations, transportation has been shaped by our cultural context as well as historical context. And I will have two examples to illustrate that this type of conceptualization. Okay, so let's go through those conceptualization a little bit, in a little bit greater detail. So as I mentioned earlier, there is little to dispute that transportation serves as connections, as it is often designed and intended for such purposes. Right? So we all know that transportation needs to connect travelers to everyday destinations. And yet, when we adopt or take this singular view of transportation, sometimes we overlook the fact that how we make the connections also matters. And sometimes when we make connections for certain group of people, there are people being left behind. So transportation as connections, when the connections being made for a specific group of people, that sometimes transportation may not function as a connection for other people, may function as a separation and a displacement. Here, I utilize the graphic here. I think many of you are familiar with this graphic. It is Elon Musk's vision of future transportation, right? And I wanted to illustrate this vision of future transportation because you actually can see the unintended harm that could pose to our society, and that this vision could possibly serve a selected group of people rather than every members of our society. So I wanted to mention that, in fact, there has been evidence, a lot of evidence, that when we overemphasize efficiency, we tend to minimize the human experience. And the missed opportunity that transportation itself is shared space for connections. And in fact, in this vision, it eliminates transportation as a shared space that bring people together. So that's kind of like why I felt like we needed to do some reconceptualization and to challenge a little bit the conventional wisdom. In this second level, that I proposed that transportation can be conceptualized as a shared space that is vital for placemaking and for community building. Now, this conceptualization is not new. In fact, back in 1970s, William White, often being considered as one of the forefathers of the placemaking movement in the United States, he had said that the street is the river of life of the city, the place where we come together, and the pathways to the center. I think the pathways to center is kind of conceptualization that transportation has connections. But I highlight here the place where we come together. And that, I think, is in line with this conceptualization that transportation as a shared space. And I illustrated here, I have two graphics here, both related to, our Interstate 94, okay? And we all familiar with the history where Interstate 94, the construction of it back then actually caused, unintended negative consequences to some of our minority communities, African American communities in our region. And that is essentially, we in our history, what we did was building transportation through communities. Now, with the MnDOT's Reimagining 94 initiative, and there are several proposals that are being put forward, how we can reimagine this transportation infrastructure. And I think some of the newer proposals, certainly that is in line with this conceptualization that transportation as a shared space, that we need to create communities through transportation, that we should be mindful that when not well designed, transportation may not connect communities actually, but separate and displace communities. So this level of conceptualization certainly not new, but I think we needed to have greater acknowledgement in, a recognition in our field about transportation as shared space. So the third level, transportation as a lived experience. This is not new either, okay? So here I wanted to cite Robin Chess, who is the co-founder of Zipcar, the company. And he said the following. He said that transportation is the center of the world, okay? It is the glue of our daily lives. When it goes well, we don't see it. When it goes wrong, it negatively colors our day, makes us feel angry and impotent, curtails our possibilities. Now, there is an underlying meaning in this quote that I want to point out here is that, when we look at the, evidence out there, that it is also clear that transportation play a more significant role influencing major life outcomes of the have-nots in particular, the people who are relatively disadvantaged in transportation. Because as Robin suggested here, that when it goes wrong, right? For the people who don't have a lot of resources, and face a lot of transportation barriers, the impact on their daily lives can be detrimental. For the haves, good transportation may mean good road conditions, good lighting, good snow removal in the winter. But for the have-nots, good transportation meaning a living wage job, meaning more opportunities to see family and friends, being able to not to miss medical appointments, being able to attend the Sunday church service, be able to participate in those spiritual events. And access to healthy food, right? So I think when we conceptualize transportation as a lived experience, it's important that we acknowledge that this conceptualization is super important to people who are underserved in our society, have been underserved in our society. So now, let me get to. I felt like this is like even higher level conceptualization, and it's very important that we recognize transportation as a social construct. Very few scholars actually have discussed transportation as a social construct explicitly. But in fact, I would want to point out that, Greg's presentation and some of the conversation we had following his conversation can be used to illustrate that transportation often is socially constructed. So our transportation system, when people talk about transportation, typically you would think of physical infrastructure, right? Physical infrastructure, immutable physical infrastructure. But when we dig deeper, it's actually socially constructed, often by human definitions and interpretations. Transportation as a social construct indicates that people's experience with transportation can be very different depending upon their beliefs and backgrounds. So by adopting this conceptualization, that transportation is a product of human definition and interpretation, we must have critical consciousness about which, when I say critical consciousness, meaning the ability to recognize that there is embedded power structure in our transportation system. So here I have 3 bullet points here. Transportation, a central component of our built environment, manifest the societal structure and the cultural assumptions that is often constructed by the dominant race or culture. And it's not surprising because typically it's the disadvantaged population groups have relatively more negative experience with our transportation infrastructure. If you look at, I study human emotions, there is a gender happiness gap. There is a happiness gap between, white and minority population groups. And it's not surprising because, typically our system is constructed, often constructed by the dominant race or culture. And given the social construction of transportation, it is critical to make perspectives of socially marginalized groups rather than those of dominant culture or race the central axis around which discourse resolves. So this means that we need to center the experience of marginalized and underserved communities when we design transportation systems. And without critically challenging the embedded power structure in transportation, transportation can enslave people, confine the opportunities in people's lives. And that is very important because if we don't critically challenge the embedded power structure, what we are doing would be reinforcing the social inequities that already exist in our system. So I wanted to take 2 examples. I'm going to be very brief on this first example because I believe some of you in the audience already saw this picture many times. I have used this experience to illustrate kind of how socially constructed transportation reinforces the social inequities. So and I used it in several of other presentations, but I'm going to be very brief about this example. So I did some field work in Arlington, Texas back in 2017. Now, Arlington is very famous in public transportation field because it is the largest U.S. city that did not have any public transportation lines until 2013, okay? So it's a city of about 400,000 people, which is almost the size of city of Minneapolis, and do not have any public transportation lines until 2013. And when I visited Arlington in 2017, they had 1 bus line running, connecting several stops to Dallas Rapid Transit line. When I did the field work, I went to the city hall. I mean, it's a great place to visit. You can look up a public meeting schedule and things like that. I entered through the front door from the sidewalk. And when I entered the lobby, immediately I did not feel welcomed because there's this large human-shaped sculpture at the center of the lobby, not facing me, but facing to the back door. And later I quickly realized that it was strategically positioned to face the back door to welcome the people who come from the parking lot. Okay, so this is a city that the default mode is a car. In a city that the default mode is a car. And as you can see, that this is a very small experience, but a very telling that when we socially, our systems, our built environment is very much socially constructed. And when we socially constructed those environments, that we often favor certain groups and leave other groups behind. So I wanted to go a little bit deeper for this conceptualization that transportation as a social construct. And here I wanted to use the traffic safety as an example. Because it is one of the most important subfield in transportation. Also, to some degree, connects to Greg's presentation. Right, and also that I'm utilizing some of the graphics that I think kind of borrowed from articles written by Peter Norden, who was a keynote speaker actually at last year's CTS conference. So traffic safety, I wanted to illustrate that how our understanding of traffic safety has been shaped by our cultural context and the historical context. So in the 1920s, cars were actually not part of the American dream. Okay. In fact, the arrival of cars in American cities was quite contentious. Okay, so you can, quite contentious due to high pedestrian fatalities associated with the car accidents. That's the New York Times headline article. And also in the 1920s, several major cities in the US considered the so-called speed governor referendum, which would require all cars to install speed capping device that would cut off car's engine, if a car exceeds 20 miles per hour, okay, for safety reasons. The auto industry, as you can imagine, their response. So they launched a massive campaign to block such measures. And one of the posters that I find very fascinating is that actually conflated the speed governors with negative stereotypes about China. So as you can imagine that our view of transportation or our view of traffic safety is being shaped by those major players in our society. Now, auto industry's effort of shaping people's understanding of traffic safety continued into 1950s and until this day. Okay, we have to think about until this day, what kind of information we are receiving, from this powerful industry. So Peter Norton actually later wrote a book called Fighting Traffic about the auto industry shaped human understanding of transportation, and I highly recommend that book. So back then, pedestrians were not considered as a part of traffic. The message they send to pedestrians is that you can only cross the street when there is no traffic, meaning you are not part of the traffic. Okay, so as you can see that street safety posters in late 1950s actually focus on behavior of pedestrians rather than the drivers. Now, let me ask you, who sponsored those traffic safety campaigns back in late 1950s? The auto industry. And they not only launched those traffic safety campaigns educating pedestrians, they also did way bigger other events where, in the 1937, the New York World's Fair, there is a possible model of the world 20 years into the future, and sponsored by the General Motors Corporation. And the future of the world is characterized by its automated highways and vast suburbs. So now I wonder, what is Elon Musk's vision of 20 years into the future, right? What is about city and transportation? And this is another example that is funded by General Motors, Corporation about the vision of the future. Through the city of tomorrow without a stop, right? Very enticing, very enticing. So I hope that those two examples, including my Arlington experience and also Peter Norton's extensive work illustrating other industries' effort shaping our view of transportation, provide a compelling evidence that transportation is socially constructed, and that we have to be mindful that the embedded systematic inequities in our existing systems. In the remaining slides, I wanted to, I hope to suggest some potential actions given those conventional and unconventional conceptualizations. So my first suggestion is to advance equity and empathy in transportation. Transportation as a shared space provides a lot of opportunity for human interaction with diverse background. Transportation is the best public space for promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI. And also that I hope the conceptualization help you to understand the importance of centering the transportation experience of underserved communities. And here is a quote. I'm not going to read that quote, but we did intensive work among different underserved communities, and it was clear that transportation is central to all aspects of their lives. And we have to make their experience more visible, and more vital to our policy making in transportation. I also suggested that we adopt the human flourishing framework to guide transportation investment and funding programs. I think it's important we recognize and identify transportation-related underserved communities as communities whose transportation barrier have hampered their ability to live a good life. I have to acknowledge that there are communities where lack of transportation have hindered their ability to live a good life. We need to align transportation funding and the investments to those identified communities for transportation equity improvements. And because transportation plays such an important role affecting their major life outcomes, it's important that we collaborate with non-transportation sector, including the public sector and nonprofit organization, to explore how transportation programs can be paired with non-transportation program to improve major life outcomes in underserved communities. And the last recommendation, I think it's, I don't know. I mean, I wanted to put it out there because I think, this presentation is about raising more questions, be more thought-provoking. I think we need to deconstruct the public-private dichotomy in transportation. When let me ask you, when you think about public transportation, what kind of investment you can think of? Public transit investments. When I ask you, if we want to improve private transportation, what kind of investments you would envision? Highway investments, right? And I don't think it's healthy to have that dichotomy. When we interviewed underserved communities, inadequate public transportation is a common theme reflecting the transportation experience of underserved communities. And I felt like, to some degree, we have narrowly defined public transportation as like bus and rail services. But in fact, public transportation can be conceptualized simply as any mobility services that decommodifies transportation and helps everyone to achieve socially acceptable standards of mobility and accessibility, regardless of their background. Right? When we provide a public transportation system, we compare we often focus on availability. Oh, there is a stop. We don't care about whether this stop, only operates between servers between 8 and 5. We don't pay much attention about the frequency of the servers, like whether it's running every 30 seconds or an hour. Like when there is a stop, we often assume there is public transportation. But is that public transportation system or that service acceptable, socially acceptable? Well, how does those type of service affect people's life outcomes? We have to ask those questions. We have to compare our service to a socially acceptable standard rather than compare to a condition that there is no public transportation. And if we adopt that view, I feel like all transportation matters should be public matters. And we need to encourage transformative thinking and innovations that significantly broaden the scope of public transportation services. So here I'm proposing that we should first acknowledge that all transportation matters are public matters. And we think about how we improve private transportation within this larger, view of that, transportation is supposed to serve the public. The ultimate goal, as I said, of a public transportation is not to provide a bus or a rail system, but a transportation system that allow everybody in the society to achieve a level of mobility and accessibility that do not hinder their ability to achieve a good life. So this is my last slide, and since we have the conversation style, I just put out some questions that I still don't have good answers to. Like I felt my presentation is just kind of a way to help you to think about those broader conceptualization questions. What about people in transportation? What should be the future of public transportation? Should there be a socially acceptable standards of mobility and accessibility? And if we all think that there should be this standard, how can we define that standard, right? Thank you for your attention. If I took longer than what I anticipated, I apologize. And thank you for your attention.
All right, and this time Yingling is going to join me in the circle. So there's only 3 open seats, so they're going fast. And as people are thinking about this, Yingling, I was really interested to ask you as a starting point. So it seems to me like the social construct idea, in some ways, is you're sort of proposing an inversion of even our decision making and starting with where are we coming from, what's our system, and how do we kind of do these other pieces of the other 4 that you highlighted. Is that a fair statement? Like sort of starting with that? And how do you think that would happen? Or what are some first steps that you would think we'd need to see? And then others, feel free to join as we're going.
Yes, so how would that happen? Again, number one is make the transportation experience of those often considered invisible in our system more visible and more vital to our transportation policy making. I think, I would challenge everybody in this room to have kind of a more critical consciousness moments. Like, do not take our system as a given, and to think about, did you encounter today something that you felt actually reveal the systematic injustice, that in our society?
Thanks, Yingling. And I got a great suggestion from Christina earlier to introduce yourselves when you start, so I thank you for that, and I'll hand it to Mauricio.
Mauricio Leon, I'm a researcher at the Metropolitan Council. One subject that hasn't come up today a lot is all these emerging and disrupting technologies that we're seeing. For example, telework. We've been from, we're all gonna telework forever. Now it's like we're not gonna telework at all. Then it's like we're gonna go hybrid. So there's all these like change that is happening very quickly. We have cities like San Francisco already have operational robot taxis. So we're seeing all this disruption, and I have to wonder, what are your thoughts on all these new trends? So I think that it's easy to connect the dots. For example, just in the last 2 weeks, we saw that another like big retail chain go bankrupt, Bed Bath and Beyond. And this is a trend that has been going on for the last 2 decades. So it really makes me wonder what will be the future of transportation, and also what are the equity implications, because a lot of the jobs that can be moved to remote work are mostly white-collar jobs that are easier to just do from the computer. And then what is the future of transit then, if less people are using the system because they can telework? I don't know what ideas or thoughts you all want to share on that.
And you are welcome to respond, Yingling. It's not just Q&A to you, but others who have thoughts on that too. But please go ahead.
I would just quickly mention that COVID-19 certainly has had some long-term impacts on our lives, and to some degree that I felt like COVID-19 revealed a lot of the systematic injustice in our transportation system, right? And if you look at the transit ridership post-COVID, it's very much the kind of essential workers and those who are most transit dependent that utilize. They actually utilize the public transportation more than before. So I think that in light of what you mentioned about technology, I think we need to be very cautious when we think about how technology can be brought into our system to serve people, especially those who have been underserved, rather than let the technology drive our conversation. Yes.
Thanks. Yeah, and one thing I was going to observe, Mauricio, is I think to Yingling's point and to your question, the idea of like how do we reevaluate what transit service is providing, and I think the idea that transit is a social construct for commuters and work, right? And that you take it at 8 and you go to work and you take it home at 5. That's also changing, right? I think that's tied into the changes we saw during the pandemic and this opportunity to say, what would it mean to just think about everyone's travel throughout the day to many destinations beyond a central district? That just jumped up to me. Ben.
Everyone, good morning. My name is Ben Hao. I'm working for Hennepin County Traffic Operations. I know Dr. Fan for a while, and I know she has been doing a great job in a lot of good projects, research projects. I want to really, there's a couple of concepts that hit me really hard, especially for the lived experience for transportation. I didn't experience that until I joined the county traffic operations, to be honest. I got 15 years experience in working on traffic transportation modeling, optimization, signals, stuff like that. Until I joined the county, one of the transportation management center at the county is to address citizens' comments, basically complaints from the citizens about the signals, the delays down there. And I think the first couple of weeks, and I saw an email sent by the commissioner. One of the citizens in Brooklyn Park sent him very nasty emails complaining about constructions during the rush hours. And obviously the commissioner replied in a very diplomatic way. I was hit me pretty hard because it's really going to impact people's lives. And also we addressed a lot of complaints about people staying at the signal as saying, I'm waiting there for 10 minutes. Even my daughter is saying that. I say, no, it's not going to be the case, and never be the case, because say you can't sitting there for 5 minutes. What I'm trying to say is, it is actually the reality. People are getting mad at. It doesn't matter with the signals or even sometimes congestion in the highways. I think, what we need to do is really think about how we can better implement a system, or even from the policy-wise to the operational-wise. And county has been developing an advanced transportation management system. It's like a small scale, like our TMC, but we're managing more like signalized intersections on the county roadways. And one of the goals I always share that is the whole $23 million, $25 million investment is just to build a system to improve the quality of life for the people. And that's all. That's the ultimate goal of that, and we're striving to that. And what I'm thinking that is from the public agencies, we have issued the projects. It's basically develop the system infrastructure to meet the future needs. And I think one question for us is how we can think about the ways to be ready for the future, either improvement mobilities or whatever the future needs and transportation initiative might be. And the last things that I think you want to keep in mind is build a mindset or mentality to really bridge the gap from the concept to construction level, and from research to reality, and also I would say from planning to the operations. And that's where a lot of work being done, but still there is kind of the gaps down there, but I'm working with U of M for several research projects, and we really just bring the research down to the bottom in the operations level. And I think the really operations level is the front line for the transportation to interact with the citizens and really just how to improve the quality of life for the people and the citizens in the different municipalities. So I think there's a lot of more collaborations between the research entities and the public agencies, and working with a consultant emerging the technologies to help the future, improve the transportation to meet the future needs.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Ben. Yeah, and thanks for highlighting all those systems where that plugs in. Appreciate that. Any initial thoughts? Mary.
I like some of the questions that you ask. I would make one comment on your graphic. However, I don't agree with your graphic in terms of the two circles that you had. The top one really showed a separation between public and private. The private is dependent upon public. The roads are public. And so we're really more at the bottom diagram, showing that there is an integration between public and private, but we need to make it. We need another diagram. Keep working on it. I appreciate you thinking about this idea. I'd like to just make one comment about how transportation professionals can help small communities. I've been working in large communities and small communities in design for decades. And there are changes that are taking place, and I think a lot of the changes that we talk about are changes that are taking place in large metropolitan areas. But there are changes also taking place in small communities. School districts are consolidating, and school facilities are being relocated on the edge of small communities. And the historic center of small communities often were the church, which were located in the center of the community. And that's morphed into the school. And so there's a whole new layer of role for the school to play in the community. And they're located on the edge of town, where a lot of people can't get to them. They are often dependent upon school buses in order to get the kids to the schools. And so if transportation planners were more sensitive to the kinds of social and cultural dynamics that are taking place, they could be much more helpful in designing transportation systems that serve current and emerging needs. And I think you're all the transportation. There's a lot of professional power in this community that's sitting around here. I see us as the Center for Transportation community that could really help move forward some of these trends that are taking apart some of our communities, or at least not strengthening them in ways that they could. So.
Thanks, Mary. And Mary, will you just introduce yourself at the tail end of your comments there? Can you just give everybody your name and your affiliation just so everybody knows?
I'm sorry. I'm Mary Vogel. For years, I ran the Center for Changing Landscapes, and currently I'm working in the Minnesota Design Center.
Thank you, Mary. Any thoughts?
I just want to say that I couldn't agree with you more. I think the graphic there was to illustrate that we cannot have public and private separated. We need to have the bottom one where all transportation matters should be considered as a public matter. As you said, that the private cars are driving on public roads, right? Your comment about smaller communities, I think, yes, some of the smaller communities often being left behind, right? And I think, a lot of the state agencies, I think they are trying very hard to really think about, for example, in Minnesota, in the greater Minnesota, how can we make transportation more, really kind of improve people's lives in those smaller communities. And I think the type of transportation issues that those smaller communities face are very different from the type of transportation that issues we face in the city. In fact, for example, when we did an interview with a White Earth tribal member, and he suggested, in the city, I would be completely comfortable taking public transportation because there are a lot of people using public transportation. There's people are more diverse among transit riders in the city. But here, I'm reluctant to take a public transportation because there is this people associated with transit users with, people don't have resources, and he doesn't like that association, and therefore, even there was public transportation that, he said that he's not willing to use it. So, as I think they're just, we have to really go into those communities and understand those unique challenges that they face.
Nicole? And I'm going to flag that this will probably be our last comment unless somebody has a burning one that comes up. And if you do, you got to come to the middle, Greg. All right, so Greg will be our last one after Nicole.
This might kick up a lot of dust, so
sorry.
just be prepared. Nicole Morris, Research Associate Professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering. So a couple of thoughts. The first is the comment about 94 and unintended consequences. I would say first, I think there were many intended consequences, right? So I think that was very intentional to be disruptive and harmful to a group of people. Perhaps never imagined how badly and how long that would last, right? But many of these decisions that we make to smooth our transportation system out, I think it is always intentional that there are groups of people that will bear the brunt of these decision making. And so I want to kind of loop back to one of the last circle, the question about do we want deliveries at 3 a.m.? And I will answer that question. I will say, no, I do not want deliveries at 3 a.m. and not for me. I do not want people in my community, I don't want my neighbors working at 3 a.m., right? That is so unhealthy, and we know it's well documented that shift work increases cancer rates, it increases heart disease. It is very unhealthy. And so if we think, oh, this is a beautiful solution, the roads are clear at night and we will have people out there driving, well, that's great for me while I'm getting my restful night's sleep as it was intended for me to be sleeping when it is dark, and I will let someone else be sicker and have a worse quality of life for me to thrive in the daytime and in the daylight, right? So I think these are always the things that we should be thinking about. These seem like great solutions for the powerful class, for the people that have the wealth to live smooth and carefree lives, and we are always going to pick a lower class of people with less power to make that possible for us, right? So no 3 a.m. deliveries for me. Robots can do it if we can solve that. Get on it, Max. We need those robots.
Thanks for highlighting that, Nicole. I was thinking about a similar thing of, for folks with disabilities, there's often a talking point and I think a really powerful argument to say, just focusing on the pedestrian realm, for example, if you build a pedestrian network that works for a person in a wheelchair, you're also building a pedestrian network that works for me, an able-bodied person, and not designing it for me as opposed to the person who has other needs makes a big difference, and I think appreciate you having that. All right, Greg. Last comment, bring us home. And make sure I introduce.
Can you hear that? I'm at the Humphrey School, and I'd like to make an observation that I think draws together the other Greg's presentation with Yingling's. I've worked on pedestrian exposure and safety on Anishinaabe reservations with Lisa Austin, who's here, and Amber Dahl, who's here, in her shop at MnDOT, and they've been putting a lot of work into addressing equity needs for tribal populations. And I have two examples. One of them occurred this morning that illustrate reconceptualization to focus on people's needs. The first one is when we first chose places to work and observe pedestrian activity with the MTO, we were videotaping it, we looked at locations that were identified by the tribes. And subsequently, when we met with county and district engineers, they said, why do you choose these sites? They didn't emerge as the top rated in our systematic safety plans. And the tribe's answer was because our community told us those were the areas that they were most concerned about, and through experience we believe those. So sometimes there's tensions between this idea of horizontal equity and trying to be safe and equitable in a very systematic way with what we get through lived experience. And so we've tried to adopt how we do this work to think about both those. But the second was, a thing that's grown out of this work is I now have this semester 8 students working on 2 projects on the Red Lake Nation that involve, one is design of elements of a shared use path that will connect Red Lake and Red Bee, and the other is looking at designs for crossing options for to get from the one stop to the post office in this village of Red Bee. And both teams designed surveys to reach information from from the Red Lake tribe. This was the surveys that were put out on the tribe's Public Works and Transportation website. And this morning when I was reading their draft report, they were talking about responses, and they said respondents said X and respondents said Y. And the tribe corrected them and said, no, we refer to our relatives. And I thought, that's a real different way. I've been to dozens and dozens of public meetings over the course of my life. I've never looked out in the audience and said that these are my relatives speaking. And that, I think when you do that, it introduces a different perspective on how you're going to address those and involve a reconceptualization that our students are trying to contend with this morning as we speak. So that's my example.
Thanks, Greg. Those are great examples. Any final thoughts?
Oh, I just wanted to thank Nicole for your wonderful comment. I agree with you that a lot of the times that, for example, the I-94, displaced low-income minority communities with surgical precision, right? And also, I think I'm very grateful for your comment about no 3 p.m. delivery, human delivery, right? Because I think that is one of the critical consciousness moments that you brought to the audience is that, science has shown that only 20% of people are relatively highly empathetic. So that's why it's so important that equity, we have to advance both equity and empathy. And the way to advance empathy is to actually visualize people's lived experience, like especially the have-nots. And I think, you just made a wonderful illustration is that what it would mean to the lived experience of the have-nots when we have a 3 a.m. Human delivery. So thank you so much.
And thank you, Yingling, for starting this great conversation today. Definitely both of them this morning are ones that can continue. Gina, are there specific takeaways, or can I disperse us? Okay, well, thank you all for continuing to participate in the CTS Councils and today's conversations. If you are joining us for the luncheon, we're starting right afterwards, I believe. So you know who you are if you're doing that. So thanks for doing that. And if you aren't, thanks for taking the time. Please continue to connect with us and connect with other folks here today. And great to see you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.